In India, we considered public sector enterprises next to God because they are considered to be the source of employment. They're generally judged upon the profitability, but the public sector is more criticized on that ground because the performance has been comparatively less. So you can see that the number of enterprises are also quite large. The challenges that are going to be faced by these institutions are also going to be larger. Good morning and welcome to the session 4, chapter 3, unit 1, first semester B.Ca, pre-reforms of Indian economy, where we are going to talk about the performance of public sector in India. Now, the most important thing right from the year 1956 onwards is that the impressive growth about the public sector enterprises. In India, we considered public sector enterprises next to God because they are considered to be the source of employment. Many of us still think that getting a central government job or a state government job is almost like getting a rebirth. It's like kind of getting a boon that has been bestowed upon you. So what we feel here is that once you get that central government job, once you make an entry into the public sector, that means your life is settled because there is a job security, you're going to get a permanent income, and the facilities and benefits are going to come into you. So right from 1956 onwards, the public sector, which comprises of both the central and the state government enterprises, have been given maximum importance. Why? Because they have been set up as the industrial hubs, industrial growth centers for both goods and services. Now you can see some of the services here, starting from Indian Oil, from Hindustan Petroleum, from NTPC, from that of Indian Railways. All these sectors have been very close to the heart of the government, and they always felt that the public sector enterprises should never be disturbed because they will provide long-term employment, long-term stability and growth to the Indian economy. Followed by the pattern of public sector investment. It's quite interesting to describe it. Why? Because India's plan in the field of economic infrastructure, that is when we are talking about power, transport, telecommunication, basic heavy industries like power, steel, petroleum, coal, all of them have been laid out on the equity capital plus the long-term capital, that you can see that we see that investment raising up to 75,300 crores in the year 2004 and 5, and followed by which, the increment has been kept on going forward, and we have seen that the public sector enterprises have been earning their niche, have been earning their growth perspective over the last 15 years altogether. Except for the matter that in between, because of the COVID factors that came into picture, the investment had come down, but nevertheless, the public sector was never let down by the central government, and there was a continuous source of funds that was pumped into the sector in order to keep the sector alive. The most interesting part of this sector is that Government of India always felt that using this sector, we can propel growth to the next level possible, and this was the biggest achievement that could be ever created by the Government of India. So that's why we always believe that this is the sector that will go up, that will create its factors of growth, its factors of employment altogether. So that's how we started rebuilding this sector. That's how we started rebuilding this entire ideology altogether. So this was one of the most interesting sector, no doubts about it, because this created a whole lot of employment opportunity for all of us. Followed by, let's try to talk about the pattern of public sector investment that we are looking into. Now, there has been always a very important question that comes into our mindset, and that one is how much in the year 2004-2005, about 5.5% remain invested in textiles, and this was done for the purpose of protecting the interests of the worker. Government of India has been very, very particular about this factor that they wanted to retain the interest of the workers. Now, India public sector is always a very big collection, and the union members and the leaders of these sectors play a very prominent role in terms of holding up the interest of the company, both from the employment perspective as well as from the government side altogether. All the political parties and the people who have come to the power have clearly understood that disturbing a central government enterprise or a state government enterprise would never be anything of good, because that has always caused a revolution to them. And at the same time, what has happened is that the private sector has always not been so trustworthy in India that they could take a large company, a large public sector, and make it run altogether. So always when it comes to the matter of trust and loyalty, the government of India has stood by its word, and they have seen that even though the public sectors were making laws on a random basis, but still the government supported this sector, and they wanted to see that in the long run the public sector would continue to deliver its performance. Now, when you see the performance of the public sector compared to that of the private, they're generally judged upon the profitability, but the public sector is more criticized on that ground because the performance has been comparatively less. Now, let's take the case of Air India and that of Jet Airways in the previous years altogether. Now we know that Jet Airways has been grounded because of so many reasons. But imagine when Jet Airways first started as a private airlines out in India, the performance of Jet Airways compared to that of Air India was simply tremendous. Now, whenever you look into a private sector versus a public sector, the privates have always focused on profits. The public sector has always focused on the social benefits. So there are two different comparisons, two different parameters on which we are talking about. The private sector has always ensured that whatever might be the conditions of the economy, they were being very, very particular about getting the profits done, pitching it in the way how it has to be done, and they always sail through the difficult times. In the case of the public sector, it has always been restricted in terms of growth, and whenever they face or they meet a dead end, they wait for the government to come back and tell what exactly needs to be done. So that's where I would always say that the public sector has always been facing a backlash when compared to that of the comparison activities altogether. And this is not something new to us. This has always been there. This has always been the talk of the town in terms of understanding how things have been going for a very, very long-term purpose altogether. Now, what I would say here is that is very, very important for all of us to understand and take it forward, is that how can we grow? How do we need to look into the public sector? So it is always not that we can go back and tell that, it's only based on the profit factor, but then you also need to understand for the public sector, there are a lot of other challenges, starting from the human resources, from the marketing, and that of promoting the companies to the next level as far as possible. Now, the next thing is that in the most recent year, the gross profits to the capital employed rose to 16.2%, in that of 2001 and 2, 17.7%, and that of 21.5%. Now, you can see that the public sectors have been making a decent growth altogether. The net profit has also increased from 6.7, 7.8, 11.7, 13%, which means to say that public sectors are equally performing well when compared to that of the private sector. So there is no much question about this factor, that are the public sectors back in terms of performance. Yes, it's always true that public sector is coming back with greater performance altogether. But a very significant fact about the profits of public enterprises is that major part of them is contributed by the oil and petroleum sector. That's quite obvious because we all know that oil and petroleum, which is considered to be the liquid gold, that has got a greater market presence. The value is high, the movement is high, and the market is very volatile, and you would see that the market capital is also very high for them, and that's probably one of the reasons the contribution is also very high in terms of the economic value. Followed by the performance is also, we need to understand that it's usual to judge the sector units by a net profit. In the case, the maximization is the one of the most important thing, but then this fails in the case of a public sector altogether. So the next time when we are going to compare a public sector and a private sector, we need to keep in mind very, very clearly that the public sector will not follow the same rules of that of a private sector. Public sector, the ideology is to make it simple. The ideology is to make it even more easier so that everybody is able to take it forward and create the growth aspect. The public sector doesn't want to be something where you just go ahead and just redefine things and take it forward. The public sector's aim itself here is that to see that we are able to move forward, we are able to create a growth aspect of development altogether. So when you talk about development, it will take some time for the development to happen, and that's where we feel that the public sector needs to take time to rebuild itself and come upon on this strategy. So definitely I would say that this is an opportunity for all of us where we need to sit, where we need to think how to re-establish the public sector, and we cannot just compare them only on the profit sake. Now, there are many units that were started in those sectors where the profitability was very low, gestation period was extremely longer time period. Now, for example, when we talk about Hindustan Construction Companies Limited or the zinc or metal companies that we have been talking about, the investment that has gone into these kind of companies have been quite high, and the gestation period has also been very, very high. Now, that was not the mistake of the company, but that was the nature of the business that public needs to understand. Now, when you are going to invest in a mining company or when you're going to invest in an infrastructure company, you're not going to see profits on day one. You're not going to see profits coming up just like that. But you are going to take some time out. You're going to understand the factor that this is how the business starts developing. So in order to happen, in order to make these things come forward to you altogether, it takes some time. It will take some growth aspect, get some, the future introspective altogether to see that how this industry can be taken forward altogether. Now, the next thing is that the expansion of public sector, this comes under the major national capability in terms of the scale of operations, which we have been talking about, the coverage of national economy, the technological capabilities, and the stock of human capital. So like any other company in this world, even the public sector companies would like to take a time in terms of understanding their coverage, their network factors, their technological factors, the human resources, how much do they contribute, what is the geospatial activity in which they are involved, and about, let's say that when we talk about this number of 700 which are owned by the state and the rest is under the central sector, so you can see that the number of enterprises are also quite large. The challenges that are going to be faced by these institutions are also going to be larger. So when we talk about the factor called as capability, it takes some time to realize, some time to understand for each one of us that how these industries function, what is the range of their function, how can we make this industry work better, and what are all the futuristic plans of this industry in terms of expansion and growth. And then we would be able to chalk out a plan in terms of the growth aspect altogether. Now, the question of profitability, which is definitely there in the minds of the shareholders, public as well as the government. So when we come to this question, though we have pointed out earlier that profit is not only the criterion, the financial performance is of the wide interest and concern as they are set up at huge cost of the national exchequer. So now what happens here is that now we need to see the factor that when a huge cost is being outlaid for the public enterprises, we need to see that we are able to achieve break even at a faster pace, which means we reduce the lagging time altogether and we start working about how to rebuild the economy. Now, this is very, very important for all of us to see that how the economy starts rebuilding and growing forward. So it is very, very important that as a matter of national concern, as a matter of a nationwide interest altogether, whenever a public sector enterprise is being created, we need to see that how much we can reduce on the capital cost, how much we can bring in external funds from foreign countries, and how fast we are able to turn around these funds and make the industry profitable as soon as possible. With this, I would come to the end of this particular session. I hope and believe that all the facts and figures that have been spoken through this session would be of great help to you, both in terms of theory as well as in the practical walk of life. In the upcoming session, we will be learning more about the economic reforms through the various industrial sectors. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.